set the stage. You just sold your business for more money than you ever thought was possible. So in fact, you are richer on paper than you've ever been before, and it's in your bank account. Yet you're feeling more uncertain than you've ever been. Well, the good news is that's normal. What? The even better news is in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what I would do if I was in your situation. Hey everyone, my name is Jacob Turner. I'm a former Major League Baseball player, and I'm currently a financial planner helping professional athletes and entrepreneurs. In today's video, we're going to talk specifically about a situation that we see a lot with clients. A client coming into us and saying, I'm selling my business. How much can I spend? How do I know that I'm good? What are the factors I should be thinking about? And the good news is I'm going to show you all this in this video today. Now, the reality of that situation is there's no guarantees in life. Nobody can guarantee you a certain investment return. Nobody can guarantee you what your total spending is going to look like in the future. But what I can tell you is you can put frameworks around it. And in today's video, I'm going to show you the frameworks that I want to be thinking about with real numbers. And then we're going to talk about what are the tweaks that we could be making along the way. And how do you set this plan up at the upfront to make sure that you have success at the start? But then what are the tweaks that you need to be making on a year-to-year basis to make sure that it stays on track for the long term? To set the stage, I want to talk about the numbers that we're going to be talking about today. So this hypothetical client situation, these numbers have been changed, the names have been altered, but this is a realistic situation that we see. Jim and Kristen came to us and Jim was selling his business. Now, he had a couple $1 million saved, but he was selling the business for $10 million. And the biggest question he had was, how much can I spend? Because if I go ahead and I pull the trigger on this and I sell this business, what I need to know for sure, Jim said, I need to know what I can spend. And we're going to talk about that in today's video. We're going to talk about the frameworks that we take clients through, how I think about this, a couple tweaks that make a huge difference in the portfolio. So let's dive right in. The first thing I like to do before we even dive into all these numbers is just get everything down. And if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're in this situation, you're a business owner, one thing I cannot stress enough, you need to understand your numbers. So the first step in any of our planning processes is to write down everything you have. Create your own net worth statement. This is just a simple balance sheet of assets and liabilities. And we do this for so many clients, and so often the response is, oh yeah, I forgot I had that. Or I didn't realize how good of a position I'm in. Or I didn't realize how I'm so weak here, but I'm so strong here. It just gives you a snapshot of everything. So for Jim and Kristen, this is what the situation looks like today. Bank accounts of about $100,000. This is just a checking account. $2.3 million of investable assets. So they've saved money along the way. They're 45 years old. You can see they have about $200,000 in Jim's 401k. We have about $100,000 in Kristen's IRA from an old job that was rolled over. And we have about $2 million in a taxable brokerage account. They own a property worth $1 million. And then you can see down here, the business, which is their biggest asset, is worth $10 million. This is what they're going to be selling, and this is what we're going to be planning around. So the next thing we always like to look at is what are we actually trying to accomplish? For Jim and Kristen, one of the things that they said was we really want to have optionality. And one thing I stressed to them when we were going through this planning process was in order to create the maximum amount of optionality, I would rather us be a little bit higher on our monthly spending, but be lower on what our fixed cost might be in the future. And what I mean by that is the only big cost they have is a house that they fully own, not even a mortgage. So a lot of their expenses are variable. And what I said was, why don't we plan for a higher monthly spend than what we currently have, but let's not buy anything that's a fixed expense? Because at 45, there's a lot of time in front of us, and they wanted that flexibility and they wanted that peace of mind. And I could not stress enough how much having a little bit more flexibility makes such a big difference. So let's take a look at this. We have $30,000 as our monthly expense here, and then we go to income. Jim has a salary of $250,000, and then he has consulting income of $50,000. Now, a couple things to point out here. The $250,000 is for 2025. He's selling the business in 2026. The consulting income starts then and goes for 10 years. And what we said here was they have a long time frame in front of them. Jim doesn't know if he wants to start another business, but he knows he wants to do something. And he's an expert at the field he's in. So what we put in there was $50,000 of consulting income for him to either advise other businesses or stay on with his current business. The next thing we have on here is savings. And you can see the biggest savings thing that we have in here is $7.8 million. This is coming from the sale of the business. And then we also have Jim's 401k being maxed out. Now, if we go into Jim's 401k, what you'll see is this is only being maxed out during the year that he's working, 2025, and then it stops in 2026. So this is 1 year that we're putting in the maximum amount. And then the joint taxable account, we're only putting this money in for 1 year when the business is actually selling. The next thing on here is our current expenses. Now, if you remember back to what I said our goals was one of the biggest goals they had was they wanted to make sure they created optionality. And by doing that, we're spending more money after they sell the business than what they currently are. Their current monthly expenses are $20,000 a month, or $240,000 for the year. After they sell the business, we are planning for their current expenses to go up to $30,000 a month. Now, one thing Jim and Kristen said was, we don't know exactly what we're going to be spending this money on, but again, our goal is we want to make sure that we have peace of mind and flexibility. Now, if you remember, one of the things I said at the beginning of this video was, yes, we want to create the framework. Yes, we want to create the roadmap, but nobody knows what 5 or 10 years in the future is going to look like. So one of the biggest ways that we factor around this is we want to create additional flexibility and optionality. And we're doing this in their situation by saying, hey, if we spend more than what we're actually spending right now, what does that plan look like? Because we can always pull back a little bit from there. The thing I always like to start with is the summary page of cash flows. So we take a lot of numbers on this page. Let's see where we're at today. Through them all. Okay. The first thing that I'm always looking at here is we have $250,000 of active inflows, and then we have $240,000 of expenses. This is the year that Jim is still working. You can see our tax payment, our planned savings, which is that 401k. So our net flows, we have $72,000 that's going out from the portfolio this year. The next year is when we sell the business. $10 million comes in, $369,000 in expenses, because remember, our spending actually is going up. We have a tax payment of about $2 million, total outflows of $2.3 million. And you can see our net flows is about $7.682 million. Our goal was to save about $7.6 million. So we're right on track there. And then what you can see is the only other inflows we have after this point are from the consulting income that Jim's going to have. No more business sales, no more full-time work. But you can see the expenses are continuing to rise with inflation. You can see the total outflows here. And you can see the net flows, which is the number that I really like to look at. And the reason why the net flows is so important is this is how much stress the actual portfolio is taking on based on what the spending is. Now, one thing I'm always looking at in these situations to build this initial framework, to build this initial roadmap, is to be able to say, okay, based on this, how much of this percentage are we spending off the portfolio? What you can see here is this is the withdrawal rate of the portfolio. And we're starting at a withdrawal rate of about 3.6%. And you can see in the highest years, we're just touching 4%. Now, traditional retirement financial advice would say 4% withdrawal rate is very safe. What I would tell you is, depending on what your income strategy is, it could actually be a little bit higher than that. So based on where we're starting at for Jim and Kristen, we're in a really good spot. And this is one thing I want to point out. Every time we're planning for clients, especially for our younger clients, a business owner, 45, selling a business, decades in front of him, Lord willing, I want to make sure that we're planning a little bit more conservatively than what's probably actually going to happen. So if we look at those two scenarios, we say the cash flow, we look at the withdrawal rate, and then we say, okay, what does this actually look like for us? One thing I always want to look at is, what does the Monte Carlo say? All the Monte Carlo is showing us is what are the percentage of chances of us taking off in the airplane, flying in the airplane, putting the thing on autopilot, following the plane all the way along, and having success all along the way. And you can see we're at about 69% here. Now, you might be thinking, is that low? Is that high? Is that good? What I like to say is anywhere above about 70% on a plan like this is a really good starting point for us. Because now I want to talk about what are the tweaks, what are the adjustments that we could make on the plan? Because remember, from a baseline starting point, what we want to do is we want to build the framework. And then from the framework, we want to say, hey, what are the tweaks that we could be making along the way? Jim and Kristen are 45 years old. There's a lot of time in front of them. One thing that is certain is that whatever plan we make, it's going to change in the future. So what I want to do is on the upfront, be able to know what are those tweaks that we could change? What are those adjustments that we could make in flight to their plan? So if we take a look down here and we take a look at what the action items, some of the things that we could potentially adjust on this plan are. One of the biggest things that I'm always looking at is how can we actually take the income? Now, this plan is showing a inflation adjusted retirement spending right here. I do not love this. If you watch any of my videos, you know that one of the biggest things I like to change here is to guardrails. And the reason why that is guardrails is a much more realistic chance of us actually spending the money. And all that means is in really good years, we're spending more, and in bad years, we're spending less. We're not going to dive into all the details of this. I have a whole nother video on that if you want to watch this. But what this is showing is this is giving us a more realistic viewpoint of what the spending could look like. And you can see right here, all of a sudden our probability of success goes from 69% to 86%. Okay, so a substantial increase just based on what our distribution strategy is. That's one small tweak we can make. Another small tweak we can make is right now our asset allocation, we're projecting about a 7% rate of return, just a smidge more than that. Now, look, I think in their situation, based on their spending, we could actually be a little bit more aggressive. If we looked at an all equity portfolio and we said our projected rate of return was going to be 10%, relatively high, but not unrealistic. All of a sudden you look at the probability of success and now we're at 95%. These are 2 small tweaks in a gamut of potentially 10, 20, 30 different things that we could be tweaking along the way. Because remember, what we're trying to do today is we're trying to build up the framework. We're trying to build up the roadmap. And remember, what Jim and Kristen said was, at very least, I want the flexibility and I want the peace of mind to know that if I sell this business, I'm good today. And I know that I don't know what life's going to look like in the future, but there are tweaks that we can make with your team along the way to make sure that we're still in a good place. These are just 2 tweaks, and all of a sudden we've gone from a 69% probability of success up to a 95% probability of success. The other thing I want to look at is, okay, what if we got a little bit more aggressive than with the spending? So if we go back down here and we say, okay, instead of us spending $30,000 a month, what if we're spending $35,000 a month? $60,000 more per year. Okay, we've already made 2 tweaks at this point. Let's see what that 3rd tweak looks like. We're still at a 90% probability of success. Now, one of the things that I always stress to the clients that we work with at Moment is it is our job to help you be a good steward of your money. It is our job to show you the different paths that are out there. And for a lot of the clients, we will go through multiple different scenarios before they make a big move in their life. These are just a couple of the small tweaks that we make along the way. But what I want to do is I want to give them a couple different roadmaps. Say, hey, we can go option 1, 2, or 3. It's my job to be the guide. It's their job to make a good decision. And it's my job to help educate them on what are the pros and cons of each one of these moves along the way. So for Jim and Kristen, they're in a really good spot. They can sell the business. They can do everything they want to do. And it all starts with them having the flexibility on the upfront with their spending. That was the biggest thing we said was, hey, we're going to spend more on this plan than what we were originally spending. And what that's going to do is that's going to give them a ton of peace of mind going into retirement, because now all of a sudden they have a lot more factors that we could be adjusting. What I'm showing you in this plan today is the baseline of the baseline. There's so many other things that we can be looking at, from tax strategies to distribution strategies to investment strategies to how we should be spending and when we should be spending and what accounts we should be pulling from. But today, what I want to show you is that from a framework perspective, this is where it all starts. And then you tweak. If you take nothing else away from this video, take this away, that you need to have a framework in place, or for me as a baseball guy, you need to have a game plan in place when you go into playing the game. And in this situation for Jim and Kristen, that game was selling a business that they had worked for decades to build, but they had decades in front of them. So the reality of that game plan is, one thing that we know for sure is it's going to change over a certain period of time. We know that whatever plan we put in place in 2025 or in 2026 when this business sells, it's going to change in 2027. It could change in 2030. It could change in 2035. Nobody knows what life is going to look like then. But what we can do is we can set the frameworks in place to make sure that we have a solid foundation to build on. We can set the frameworks in place to make sure that we have confidence knowing that if we sell the business that we work so hard for, we've done everything right. We've done all the planning we can up to this point. And guess what? We know that in those uncertain times, we've already talked about some of the tweaks that we could look to make. We talked about how the fact that we could maybe save more, we could spend more, we could make more consulting income, we could change with the distribution strategy. Like, there's so many different things that we can make modifications on. But the key to all this is you can't make modifications unless you have a plan in place in the first place. So if you're an entrepreneur out there and you're thinking about selling your business and you're thinking, man, that sounds great, but it also comes with a ton of uncertainty, check out our team at momentprivatewealth.com. After all, we specialize in helping people just like you. As always, my goal is to help you get smarter with your money. Until next time, my friends.